Hello and welcome to Church at Home with Rachel for Tuesday, the 9th of May. Just full disclosure here, I already started recording this and somebody came to the door and I need to learn to edit because I was on a roll. It was a great video. So now you get take two and all of the great, brilliant stuff is already gone. Anyway, um, I had a conversation last week with someone and we were talking about churches and, why don't churches get rid of the pews and put in chairs and make the space more flexible and more comfortable and things like that. And we had this great conversation and we were talking about the possibilities then that could happen. And I mentioned a church in New Brunswick that has done just that. They have this beautiful, beautiful church with big stained glass window and the altar at the front. And they took out all the pews and put in chairs, which means that during the week, they can do things like have a seniors lunch. So they pull out those remember the old card tables with the folding legs and everything? They pull those out and they set people up and they can have lunch. And then people can play cards, they can knit, they can sew, they can do whatever they wish to do in this big, beautiful space that people can just drop in and be in that space. And when I said that, well, the response was, well, we have a church that has we have a food bank and we have a gym and we have a big space where we already do lunches and everything. And there was a bit of pushback, understandable, but a bit of pushback about like using the space. Like, well, we have this. Okay, so why bother taking the pews out then? If you can do all of those things in the rest of your building, why bother taking out the pews? That church is my home church, and I think it's beautiful with the pews. And I'm pretty sure I'd be kind of grumpy if I went back in and there were chairs there. So I'm a big hypocrite. I get that. Um, but I think it's about security. I think it's about holding on to those things that we feel comfortable with and we know so well. And again, with full disclosure, I have to say I'm saying this as I'm wrapped up in the Reverend Jude's blanket that was in his cage. I'm not ready to let go of the past. I'm not ready to let go of those things that make me feel secure and comfortable and remind me of good times. So, that being said, I am not necessarily saying we need to go out and take out all our pews and put in chairs. But maybe we do need to start rethinking about our churches and not specifically the whole building. Yes, if we have buildings that we're not utilizing well, that could be used better, then yes, we need to. Our stewardship says we need to use them better. We're not just going to simply close down a church because, we don't use it well, but we can maximize the use. That would be fantastic. However, maybe we need to think about how we use the spaces we're currently using, in particular the worship spaces. Not a lot of churches anymore don't have other spaces, whether it's a basement or a parish hall or something that could be used more often than on a Sunday. But we all have worship space, that sacred space where, maybe in an Anglican church, we would see stained glass windows and altars and a font and an organ and candles and all of those things, and usually pews. One of the churches that I have in Wainwright, when I first came here, when I interviewed, it was in the middle of COVID. And because in order to worship safely at that time, before we sort of closed right down, we had the churches, the pews were 6 feet apart, so people could sit 6 feet away from people. And this is a church that was sort of built, this incarnation of the church was built in the 80s. So it has those accordion doors. Remember those? They can close a classroom or a boardroom and cut them in half and pull the doors closed so you can reopen them. Well, they have these accordion doors, and there's the nave. So the Anglican church, there's the sanctuary, which is where the altar is, the chancel, which is the space that often the priest or the clergy and the choir would sit is the chancel space around the sanctuary. And then the nave is where the people sit, where all the pews are. So where the end of there's the sanctuaries over here and the nave is back here. Where the back of the nave is, there's these accordion doors. And because of COVID, they had those opened and the pews moved so that they were 6 feet apart back into then the parish hall, which is on the other side of the accordion doors. And so that's how I knew the church the whole time I had been there until Easter of 2022, when we put all the pews back to where they normally were. It's absolutely beautiful. It's a lovely space to worship in. And we closed the accordion doors. And for everybody in church, that was a gift. We're back to normal. We're back to where we used to worship. This is how the space we used to worship in. But for me, I missed seeing the bright light. It's a very dark church. The lights need to be updated. It's It's a very dim church, and where I stand, the lighting, I have a chandelier over my head that doesn't give me any light. I find it very, very dark. But when those accordion doors were opened, the parish hall lights, which are big, bright lights, and there's windows in the parish hall, that provided a lot of light and a lot of airiness. And it wasn't claustrophobic. It was beautiful. It also meant that anybody who sort of wandered in late, or somebody who was maybe feeling a little bit more, would feel a bit more comfortable being a bit further away from people if they were sort of introducing themselves to the community, starting out with us, gave them a place to be. It also meant that I could smell the coffee percolating in the coffee pot during the church service that we would have for coffee hour. It was beautiful. I prefer that church with the doors open because it shows hospitality. It shows there's room for all. There's opportunity. There's light for all. And I thought that was incredible. It's still a beautiful church with the doors closed, but it's my preference would be to reopen them. I know that's not going to happen in the near future, but I can dream. But just thinking about that and thinking about the conversation I was having where we talked about how great it would be if we would get more flexible with our worship space. But then when faced with the possibility of, well, this is what you could do, coming back with, yeah, but we have all these other spaces where we can do those things in. What if it wasn't about just the doing of the things and the place that we happen to have a place for them? What if the important part was that that very worship space needs to be used that way? What if that's the part that we're missing? What if our churches really did recognize that our sanctuaries, our chancels, our naves, and I'm going to start using the word sanctuary because a lot of denominations refer to the sanctuary as the holy place where people gather. So what we would call a nave in the Anglican Church, and I think possibly in the Roman Catholic Church, other churches call the sanctuary. It's the big space where people worship. So I'm going to flip to using that terminology because I think it's important here to make that distinction. What if we were to look at our sanctuary, that place where we gather on Sundays and sometimes other times of the week to worship God and to be fed and to be filled up with the Word of God and the sacrament, the body and blood of Christ, or however it is that we worship? What if we started recognizing that that sanctuary, that sacred and holy space, should be made sacred and holy for more than simply the formal act of worshiping? What if instead of relegating our AA groups or our Narcotics Anonymous groups off to the Sunday school room or the parish hall, what if they were invited to be in the sanctuary, recognizing that they are not a religious group and that not everybody there would believe in God, but recognizing that that place is sacred because of the stories that are shared, whether it's church stories or people's stories? What if we were able to have lunches and coffee breaks and game playing and storytelling and crafting in that sacred space? What if we stopped thinking about the place where we worship on Sunday as being set aside for worship and start recognizing that when we fully live into who God calls us to be, that is worship? That when we celebrate who we are because God has made us who we are, that a preacher or a teacher or a craft person or a game player or someone who, you know, takes care of people, teaches first aid classes, or sits together with other people who are struggling and learning how to take care of themselves in an AA or 12-step group, or all of the different possibilities that could happen. What would be wrong with that? What would be wrong with having the food bank in the church itself rather than tucked into some Sunday school room or in a corner someplace or in the basement? What would be wrong with having the shelves right there for people to see on a Sunday? Oh, our shelves are getting emptied. We need to fill them back up. What would be wrong with people coming in to receive food from a food bank and seeing the sacred space, seeing the beauty of the candles or the stained glass window with the light shining through, and the possibility or the opportunity for them to go and sit and be quiet and gentle before they get their food or after they get their food, before they leave the building, to be present in that space? Why do we silo what we do as church, what we do as community? Why can't we come back to that community center? I had a great conversation with someone a couple of days ago talking about when new communities began, one building would be built first. Before people build their houses, before people did all of their individual stuff, they would build a building that would be the church, the school, the community center. What if we started looking at our churches as a way, an opportunity, as an environment, as a geography in which we could serve the world? Not necessarily to bring them to Christ, not necessarily to teach them about God and tell them this is the way to heaven, but simply to be Christ with them, for them, and recognize Christ in them, even if they don't believe. What would be wrong with taking out our pews and making our spaces just that much more flexible? Because after all, shouldn't our churches reflect God? And is God's love not the most flexible love there is? The most welcoming, the most all-inclusive? Maybe our churches, in particular our sanctuaries, our naves, should become that flexible, inclusive, and welcoming. What do you think? Just some ideas. Thanks for hanging out with me today. I'll see you again tomorrow for Church at Home with Rachel. God bless.